Chapter 9 is about where to begin, how to use the guide, and how to start. So the first step, of course, is to understand what your needs are, to look at your municipal plan, consider whether or not you need a housing needs assessment, consider the local market dynamics as it pertains to housing, and also consider whether your town plan recognizes the need for a bylaw update. And just as you need to consider the community as a whole, then the question is, are there targeted places within the community that you really want to focus on? Is it the center? Is it the neighborhoods? Perhaps it's even the suburban edges. And then Mallory talked a great deal about gauging support and capacity because, as we've discussed throughout all these chapters, you really need to fine-tune the solutions that you choose to implement based on the local support, both politically, from a staff perspective, and economically. I want to go into a little more detail on this because one of the first things you need to consider is who's at the desk, who's reviewing the plans, what is their capacity, because anything you do to adjust your bylaw will involve a learning curve. And so how to do that delicately, understanding perhaps the limitations of staff. In many places, in the smaller communities, you're relying on the regional planning commissions for assistance, or perhaps you're relying heavily on your planning board. And so you have to be cognizant of all of that when you're making decisions about implementation. Then the other really big question is political will. How many champions do you have amongst the electeds? That's one reason today we focused on the small steps first, is because most of those do have political support when it's just about making existing conditions legal. The next step is to calibrate it for the local conditions. So in the primary recommendations section of the guide, it divides things into stage 1 and stage 2 fixes are basically the easy, do this first, and then the more complicated steps that you can add in later as people adjust to change. Finally, at the back of the guide in the resources section are some model bylaws that were developed for the Vermont context and specific situations that could assist you in your goals of housing affordability. One thing in particular is a detailed ADU bylaw, and we would recommend you look at that for model language. And I just wanted to end with this slide that if you do nothing else, do this. So if there were 3 things only that you had the capacity for, what would they be? What are the 3 easy fixes that could make a big difference in the short term? The first is reduce parking requirements, and this is in any context. The second is increase the ADU area maximums because they're set extremely low in most jurisdictions. And then finally, permit residential uses by right.